Picture 10 refrigerated railroad cars sitting on a siding in the winter of 1953, packed end to end with frozen turkeys. Not a few hundred birds, not a few thousand, 260 tons of turkey, more than 500,000 pounds of Thanksgiving dinner that nobody had bought. The company that owned them, a family poultry outfit out of Omaha, Nebraska, had a real problem on its hands, because frozen turkey does not stay frozen forever, and a refrigerated rail car is not a warehouse. So they did the only thing they could think of. They kept the birds moving. They ran those cars back and forth across the country, coast toward coast and back again, just to keep the compressors running and the meat cold, while the men in the front office tried to figure out what on earth to do with all of it. That tangle of frozen turkey, sitting on the rails because there was nowhere else to put it, is where this story begins. Because the fix that somebody dreamed up, the thing that turned a warehouse-sized mistake into money, did not just save a turkey company. It changed how a whole country ate dinner. It changed what a kitchen was for, and it changed what a mother's evening looked like, and what a family's night around the television looked like, for the next 70 years. If you grew up in America in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, you have held this thing in your hands. You have peeled back the foil and burned your fingers on it. The question is how a screw-up with leftover turkey became a symbol of an entire era, and who really deserves the credit for it, because that part has been argued about for a very long time. To understand why it mattered so much, you have to remember what an American dinner actually was before all this. Go back to the early 1950s. The war was over. The men had come home. America was building houses faster than it ever had, throwing up whole neighborhoods of little ranch homes with little kitchens and filling them with young families. And in almost every one of those kitchens, dinner was a job. A real job with real hours, and it belonged almost entirely to one person, Mom. Think about what that meant in practice. There was no shortcut. If the family was going to eat at 6, somebody had been working on it since 4. You peeled the potatoes by hand, the peas you shelled, or you opened the cans. You watched the roast so it would not dry out. And after the table was set and the food was served hot, then, when everyone was finished, you stood at the sink and washed every pot, every pan, every plate, every fork. Then you did it again the next night, and the night after that. 365 nights a year. For most American women in that decade, the kitchen was not a place you visited. It was a place you reported to. And those kitchens were small. The new post-war suburbs going up around every city were built fast and built cheap. Little ranch houses and split levels with compact kitchens meant for one person working alone. There was no dishwasher in most of them. There was a sink, a stove, an icebox, or one of the new electric refrigerators, and a woman who was expected to turn raw ingredients into a hot, balanced, attractive meal night after night, with a baby on her hip and the radio going. Cooking was not a hobby you did when you felt like it. It was unpaid, unending labor, and it was assumed, the way the sun coming up was assumed. Magazines of the day ran article after article on how to get dinner done faster, how to plan a week of meals, how to feed a family of 5 on a budget without anybody complaining. The hunger for a shortcut was already there. The country was waiting for someone to invent one. Now food companies had been chipping away at this for a generation. The man who really opened the door was Clarence Birdseye. While working up in the frozen north years earlier, Birdseye had watched fish caught through the ice freeze almost instantly in the brutal cold, and noticed that when it thawed, it still tasted fresh. Slow freezing, the kind a home icebox did, formed big jagged ice crystals that tore food apart and left it watery and limp. Fast freezing, hard and quick, formed crystals too small to do that damage. Birdseye spent the 1920s turning that observation into machines that could flash freeze food on an industrial scale. Then he did the part that really mattered. He worked with grocers and equipment makers to put freezer display cases into stores, so there was somewhere to actually sell the stuff. By the 1950s, you could walk into a market and buy frozen peas, frozen fish, frozen vegetables, frozen fruit. Frozen food was no longer a strange or suspicious idea. It was ordinary. But here is the thing. Frozen peas are not dinner. Frozen fish is not dinner. You still had to take all of it home, thaw it, cook it, season it, plate it, and clean up after it. The freezer case had made the raw ingredients easier to keep. Nobody had yet made the meal itself easier. Nobody had figured out how to sell a person an entire dinner, fully cooked and balanced and ready, that you could simply heat and eat. The pieces were all sitting on the table. Quick freezing existed, freezer cases existed, home freezers were spreading. A hungry, overworked market existed. Somebody just had to put the pieces together into one tray. And it took a mountain of unwanted turkey to force the issue. And then came the turkeys. What exactly happened inside that Omaha company in early 1953 is where history starts to get slippery, and I want to be honest with you about that from the start, because the story you have probably heard is part fact and part legend, and the people who lived it did not all tell it the same way. So let me give you the version that has been told the most, the one printed in newspapers and magazines for decades, and then I will tell you who has disputed it and why. The company was C.A. Swanson & Sons. It had been founded back in 1899 by a Swedish immigrant named Carl Swanson, who came to Nebraska with almost nothing and built a butter, egg, and poultry business into one of the biggest names in frozen food in the country. Carl died in 1949, and his two sons, Gilbert and Clark Swanson, took over the family business. By the early 1950s, Swanson was a giant. Turkey was a big part of what they sold, and turkey, then as now, was a holiday bird. People bought it for Thanksgiving, and in 1953, Swanson badly misjudged how much turkey America was going to want. They had ordered, or processed, far more than the country bought, and when the holiday passed, they were left holding all of it. The number that has come down through the years is that 260 tons of turkey went unsold. 520,000 pounds of bird. Try to picture that. That is not a stockroom of turkey. That is a small mountain of it. And frozen meat is unforgiving. It cannot just sit. It has to stay cold, every hour of every day, or it begins to thaw. And once 500,000 pounds of turkey starts to thaw, you are looking at total loss and a real public health nightmare. Swanson did not have cold storage anywhere near big enough to hold it all. So they did the strange, desperate thing that the story is built on. They loaded the turkeys into 10 refrigerated railroad cars. And because the refrigeration units in those particular cars only ran while the train was actually moving, they could not just park them. They had to keep the cars rolling, back and forth across the country, burning money on every mile, just to keep the compressors turning and the meat hard frozen, while the men in the Omaha front office tried to think their way out of it. A rolling, humming, very expensive disaster on wheels, and the clock was running. Enter a Swanson salesman named Jerry Thomas. By his own account, given many times over the following decades, Thomas was the man who solved it. The story he told went like this. He was visiting a supplier, and he saw the single-serving food trays that the airlines were using, the metal trays with little molded compartments that let a flight attendant serve a hot meal to a passenger in a cramped seat. Pan American Airways was using something like it, and Thomas said the idea hit him right there. What if you took that airline tray, made it a little bigger, gave it 3 compartments, and filled it with a complete dinner? Turkey in the big section, vegetables in the small ones. Freeze the whole thing, box it up, and sell it to a family that could heat it in the oven and eat it without cooking a single thing. Thomas said he sketched the 3-compartment aluminum tray himself. He said he came up with the contents of that first meal, turkey with cornbread dressing and gravy, sweet potatoes and buttered peas, and he said he gave it the name that would make it famous. He called it the TV dinner. For all of this, Thomas said, The company gave him a $1,000 bonus and a promotion. And for the rest of his life, Jerry Thomas was known, in obituaries and trade magazines and Hall of Fame ceremonies, as the father of the TV dinner. It is a wonderful story. Clean, clever, one man and a flash of insight. The problem is that a lot of people who were there said it did not happen quite that way. Here is where the dispute comes in, and it is worth slowing down for, because the truth of who invented an everyday object is almost never as tidy as the legend. After Thomas died in 2005, and even before, members of the Swanson family and a number of former Swanson and Campbell employees pushed back hard on his account. They said the 3-compartment tray and the TV dinner name did not come from a traveling salesman at all. They came from the top. The credit, these people insisted, belonged to the Swanson brothers themselves, Gilbert and Clark, who had the core ideas. One version has Gilbert Swanson getting the tray idea from an airline meal he was served on a business trip. Another has him naming it after a party where guests sat balancing plates on their laps in front of a television set. The company's marketing chief, a man named Crawford Pollock, was also named as a driving force behind the product and its packaging. The fight got loud enough that when Thomas died, a writer at the Los Angeles Times published an opinion piece calling him a charlatan, arguing that he had taken credit for something a whole team built. Newspapers that had run glowing obituaries naming Thomas as the sole inventor found themselves printing second looks and corrections. To this day, the Library of Congress, which keeps track of exactly these kinds of questions, says plainly that the full story of who invented the TV dinner is not settled. So if you have been told for years that one clever salesman dreamed up the TV dinner in a single afternoon, the honest answer is that he was part of it, that he told the story better than anyone else, and that other people who were in the room remembered it differently. But there is one name in this story that nobody argues about, and it is not a salesman or a Swanson brother. It is a young woman. Her name was Betty Cronin, and she was a bacteriologist working for Swanson. When all the talk about trays and names was over, somebody actually had to solve the hard problem, the one that would decide whether this product worked at all or poisoned people. And that problem was this: a complete dinner is made of different foods that cook at completely different speeds. Turkey wants a long, gentle heat. Peas want a short one. Sweet potatoes are different again. If you freeze all of them together in one tray and put that tray in an oven, how do you get every single item to come out hot, safe to eat, and not turn to either rubber or mush, all at the same moment? And how do you do it in a way that a tired mother at home, with no training, can get right every time? Betty Cronin, barely into her 20s, was the one who worked that out. She ran the tests, over and over, night after night. She figured out the food science of it, how thick to make each portion so the thin foods and the thick foods would finish at the same time, where to place each item in the tray so the oven's heat moved through every compartment correctly, how to keep dangerous bacteria from ever getting a foothold during the long chain of cooking, freezing, shipping, storing, and reheating. A chain with a dozen places where food could go wrong and make somebody sick. She tested recipes on her friends in late-night sessions, watching what held up and what fell apart. She later remembered wrestling especially with breaded foods, like fried chicken, asking herself, in her own words, what kind of breading would stay on through freezing, not be too greasy, and still taste good. That question sounds small. It was not. Get it wrong and you have a soggy, unsafe mess and a product nobody buys twice. That was not marketing. That was the actual invention, the unglamorous engineering that made the whole thing possible. And she did it as a very young scientist whose name most people who ever ate a TV dinner never heard. The arguing men got the headlines. Betty Cronin got the problem that actually had to be solved. And she solved it. If you want to know who really made the TV dinner work, the honest answer points straight at the lab, not the sales floor. So put the pieces together. You have the tray, whoever drew it first. There is the name, whoever said it first. You have Betty Cronin's science making it safe and edible. And out there, still riding the rails, you have all that frozen turkey, waiting to be turned into something. In 1953, Swanson put it all together and made a bet. They ordered 5,000 of the aluminum trays. In the plant in Omaha, women stood along assembly lines with spatulas and ice cream scoops, portioning turkey and gravy and cornbread dressing and peas and sweet potatoes into those little compartments by hand, one tray at a time. There was no fancy robotics. It was human hands, scoop after scoop, filling each section to the right line so every dinner came out the same. Each finished tray was sealed under a sheet of foil, slid into its cardboard box, and frozen solid, ready to ride a refrigerated truck to a grocery store freezer case somewhere in America. And the box itself is where the marketing genius really showed. They did not print a plain label. They designed the whole package to look like a television set. The picture of the food sat inside what looked like a TV screen, framed by the wood grain cabinet of a console television, complete with control knobs and tuning dials printed right onto the box. You were not just buying turkey and peas. You were buying a little television with dinner playing on the screen. The name stamped across the front said, simply, TV dinner. 2 words. And those 2 words would outlast the tray, outlast the company as the family knew it, and outlast every single person who argued over who thought of them. That choice was not an accident, and it was not just cute. It was perfectly aimed at the single biggest change happening in American life at that exact moment. Because in 1950, only about 9% of American homes had a television. Just a few years later, by 1954, that number had jumped to more than half of all homes. By the mid-1960s, it was over 90%. In the span of a single decade, the television went from a rich man's novelty to the glowing center of the American living room. The whole country was rearranging its furniture and its evenings around that screen. Swanson saw it. A family that wanted to watch television at dinner time had a problem. You could not easily eat a full home-cooked meal in the living room. Dinner happened at the table, in the other room, away from the set. But a TV dinner, in its own little tray, hot from the oven, was a meal you could carry to the couch and balance on your lap while you watched. The product and the appliance fit together like a key in a lock. They even sold folding metal tables to set in front of the couch, the TV tray, so you would have somewhere to put it. The dinner was named after the thing every family suddenly wanted to sit and stare at. That was the whole pitch, and it landed. The first Swanson TV dinner went into grocery freezer cases on September the 10th, 1953. It cost 98 cents. Under $1 for a complete turkey dinner, no cooking, no peeling, no pots to scrub, ready in about 25 minutes in the oven. The advertising made the promise out loud. One famous line showed a stylish woman, dressed to go out, with the words, "I'm late, but dinner won't be." And America bought them. Fast. The first run of 5,000 sold, and then it kept going. In 1954, the first full year of production, Swanson sold 10 million TV dinners. The next year, 1955, they sold 25 million. The factory ran flat out. What had started as a panicked attempt to get rid of leftover turkey had become one of the fastest-selling new products the food business had ever seen. In April of 1955, the giant Campbell Soup Company bought Swanson outright, and the TV dinner kept right on climbing. Now watch what it did to the country, because this is the part that reaches all the way to your own kitchen. The TV dinner did not just give people a quick meal, it quietly rewired the American evening. Start with the woman at the sink, the one we left there at the beginning, washing pots, 365 nights a year. The early 1950s were exactly when millions of American women were moving into paying jobs outside the home, while the old expectation that dinner was still her responsibility had not budged an inch. She was working all day and was still supposed to put a hot meal on the table at night. The TV dinner handed her a way out that did not require anyone's permission. Heat it, serve it. There were no pots. There was nothing to peel, nothing to plan, no recipe, and almost nothing to clean. For a woman stretched between a job and a family, that little foil tray was not a gimmick. It was an hour of her life given back to her, every single night. That convenience came with a quieter cost, and Americans felt it without always naming it. For generations, the family dinner had been the one fixed point of the day, the time everybody sat down together, in one place, at 1 hour, and talked. The TV dinner started to dissolve that. Now everyone could eat whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, in front of the television, on their own schedule. Dad ate in his chair. The kids ate on the floor. The conversation that used to happen across the table got replaced by the glow of the screen. Some people loved the freedom of that. Others, looking back, mourned it. But there is no question it happened, and the TV dinner was right at the center of it. It also changed what Americans thought a meal could be. Once Swanson proved that people would gladly pay for a finished dinner they only had to heat, the whole industry rushed in. Other companies launched their own frozen dinners, racing to grab a piece of this new market that had not existed a few years before. The menus grew far beyond turkey, into Salisbury steak with its gravy, fried chicken, meatloaf, macaroni and cheese, fish sticks, the whole comfort food lineup that anybody who grew up in those decades can still see and smell in their mind. In 1960, Swanson added a fourth compartment to the tray, a little square just for dessert, for a warm brownie or a bit of apple cobbler. And that small addition told you everything about where this was going. It was no longer just about feeding people fast. It was about giving them the whole experience of a dinner, sweet ending included, with no work at all. By the end of the 1950s, Americans were spending $500 million a year on frozen meals. And this fit a much bigger change sweeping through the post-war country, a hunger for convenience in every part of life. These were the same years that gave America the drive-in, the fast food hamburger stand, instant coffee, cake from a boxed mix, the automatic dishwasher for those who could afford one, and 1,000 other products that all sold the same promise. Less work, more time, modern living. The TV dinner was not an oddity floating alone. It was one of the purest examples of a whole culture deciding, all at once, that the old, slow ways of doing things were worth trading away for speed. The idea that dinner was something you made from scratch, by hand, every single night, was no longer the only idea anyone had. Dinner could come from the freezer. A whole convenience food world, the one we are still living in today, cracked open out of that one little tray of leftover turkey. And here is a small irony that says a lot about how a brand takes over a culture. By 1962, Swanson actually dropped the words TV dinner from its packaging. The reason was almost funny. People had started buying the things for lunch, for breakfast, for any meal at all, not just dinner in front of the television. The name had become too narrow for how people were actually using the product, but it was already too late to erase it. The phrase TV dinner had escaped the box. It had become the words ordinary people used for any frozen meal in a tray, no matter who made it, no matter what the label said. The company let go of the name, and the country held on to it anyway. That is what it looks like when a product stops being a product and becomes a part of the language. If you grew up with these, you remember the whole little ritual, and you remember it with your hands as much as your head. You remember sliding the heavy cold box out of the freezer and feeling how solid it was. There was the oven too, because for most of the TV dinner's life, there was no microwave, and you waited the better part of half an hour while it heated, the kitchen filling with that particular smell. You remember pulling it out with a towel because the foil was scalding, and peeling that foil back one corner at a time so the steam would not catch your fingers, and finding the gravy bubbling and the dessert square in the corner, still cool in the middle if you rushed it. And you remember the taste. which was never quite like a real home-cooked meal, and somehow did not need to be, because it was your own little tray, nobody else's, and you got to eat it in front of the set. For a kid in 1971, a TV dinner on a folding tray table while the television played was not a sad compromise. It was a small event. It felt modern. Honestly, it felt like the future had arrived in a box. The aluminum tray itself, the heart of the whole thing, the part Jerry Thomas always said he sketched, had a long run and then bowed out too. For decades, that little foil tray with its 3 or 4 compartments was the unmistakable shape of a quick American meal. But when the microwave oven swept into American kitchens in the late 1970s and the 1980s, metal trays became a problem because you cannot put aluminum in a microwave. The whole appeal of the microwave was speed. Dinner hot in 5 minutes instead of 25, and the old foil tray could not come along for that ride. So the foil gave way to plastic and to paperboard, trays you could heat in minutes without ever turning on an oven. The dinner survived by shedding the very tray that had defined it. Even Thomas's proudest claim, the airline tray made of aluminum, in the end got thrown out and replaced. So what do you make of all of it? A turkey company makes a giant ordering mistake. The leftovers ride the rails because there is nowhere to put them. Somebody, and we may never fully agree on who, has the idea to copy an airline tray and freeze a whole dinner inside it. A young scientist named Betty Cronin quietly does the hard work that makes it safe to eat. A marketing team ties it to the one machine every family is racing to buy, the television, and gives it a name so good the country never gives it back. And from that pile of unsold birds comes an object that changes the American evening for the better part of a century. The Swanson TV dinner mattered far beyond 98 cents and a foil tray. It was one of the first times a company sold Americans not just food, but time. The promise was never really about turkey. It was about getting an hour back. It was about a working mother sitting down at the same moment as her family, instead of standing alone at the stove. And it was about choosing convenience and slowly, without quite deciding to, trading away the long shared meal at the table for the quick meal in front of the screen. We are still living inside that trade. Today, most Americans still eat while watching something glowing, the phone now as often as the television. The shared family dinner, the kind that vanished one tray at a time, is something people now have to work to bring back on purpose. That whole shift, the convenience and the loneliness of it both, started with a panicked company trying to get rid of too much turkey. So the next time you peel the film off a frozen meal and slide it into the microwave, and stand there for a couple of minutes waiting for the beep, think about those 10 railroad cars rolling back and forth across the country in the winter of 1953, full of birds nobody wanted. Somebody looked at that mess and saw, of all things, the future of dinner. They were right. And whether the credit belongs to one fast-talking salesman, or 2 brothers from Omaha, or a young woman in a lab coat solving the part that actually mattered, the thing they made together outlived all of them, and it is probably still sitting in your freezer right now. If you enjoy stories like this one, the hidden history behind the ordinary things in your own kitchen, take a second to subscribe so the next one finds you.